So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our, what is this, our July offering of 2022 of our practically monthly workshops from the Florida Interest Network. I want to welcome all of you and hope that you have been following us on Facebook and keeping up with all of our offerings. There are a couple of more that are happening in the very near future, so be on the lookout for that. In August, we'll be talking with the executive director of the 491 board. Also in August, we're going to be having a workshop from a professor out of St. Thomas who is going to speak about marriage and family therapy and spirituality and religion. So that should be super interesting. And then starting in September, we're going to swing into the CEU, continuing education workshops. So stay tuned. And if you're watching this on YouTube, keep looking for those other offerings to show up in our YouTube channel. This evening, we are graced by Richard Long. Richard is a longtime LMFT. We have kidnapped him from Georgia, where he was for a good long while. And Richard has been very busy in the telemental health area, was advocating for that and helping write law on that long before the pandemic. So Richard has a very long view of the horizon of what's coming up. But this evening, he's going to be talking about working systemically with children in foster care. So I'm going to make him the host so he can share his slide deck. And I am looking forward to hearing that. Richard, any first words you want to say as we get started?
No, just want to welcome everybody. So glad you are able to open up your evening to allow us to come into your computers. So thanks for joining us. Let's see. I think what happens is if I take this away. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, I do share screen. Is that what I do?
That's what you do.
Okay, so got that. And then to do this. No, don't do that. Desktop there. No.
So did you hover at the bottom to see share screen? The green share screen.
Share screen. Oh, there we go. Ta-da. Okay, terrific.
Perfect.
That show up in everybody's. Hopefully that shows up with you. We're talking
I believe, Richard, you said that you welcome questions in chat, which I will be monitoring as we go along. So those of you participating, if you have a question, feel free to put it into chat and I'll make sure Richard hears it.
Yeah, thank you. So we're talking about working systemically with children in foster care. So let's just sort of make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about that. You know, we're looking at things like developmental stage of the family. You know, is this a family that has young children, has middle school children, has high school children, or much older? We're also talking about ethnicity. What is it that sort of has happened to the family in foster care, and how is it that the intrusion of the state on the family is being viewed from a point of view of ethnicity? What are we seeing in terms of who's impacting the system? What just happened to the hierarchy when the state became involved? Who's basically leading the family now, or what's just happened with leadership? Where are boundaries now with this intrusion coming in from the state? What about coalitions, alliances, and collusions and those kind of things? So when I'm talking systemically in a broad kind of way, those are the issues that I think are important for us to consider. What I want to do this evening is spend some time making sure we're all clear on this whole business of the child welfare system. What do the numbers look like? What is it we know about children, and in a macro kind of way, what sort of themes emerge from working with them? What sort of assessment tools exist? what sort of goals might make some sense, treatment approaches that might make some sense, what's the benefit. And then for those of you who are thinking about, hey, that's a population I'd like to work with, how would you begin to kind of think about that? I think, one of the initial sort of parts of this is to take a look at our numbers. Roughly, we have about 25,000 in the state of Florida, give or take, a few numbers that have been removed from the home. When you look at the specifics, something like 86% come in there through sex trafficking. That the next one basically is about 25 to 30, there's a typo there, 25 to 30% of the children are removed related to drug. And if we wanted to overlay one more piece, it's probably the domestic violence piece. And I'm not sure what the number would be on that. What I think is important for us, backing up for just a minute and kind of saying, how did all this happen, or what happened? The first piece of this is that there is some sort of a phone call, typically, that comes into the Department of Children and Family. That phone call can come from next door neighbor, can come from a family member, can come from a variety of kind of places. Once that number comes in, there is basically a investigator who takes a look at whatever this report is and checks to see whether or not that report is accurate. Whatever it is, this person has called in and said they've observed or heard about, or whatever they want to report. And keep in mind that can be voices were raised over there. I heard a kid scream. I saw, drugs coming in and coming out of the place that lived. Whatever it is that's reported, that's what's investigated. And that then triggers a removal of the child from a home. One of the things for us as family therapists to avoid getting tripped up in is the whole idea of countertransference. And what I mean by that is, as you begin working with the family, you sometimes may find yourself questioning the state and saying, I don't think they're right. I think, I don't think there were any drugs, or I don't think there was sex trafficking going on, or I don't think the kid was really abused. I think maybe they raised their voice, but I don't think that's abuse. Okay, and what I would say to you is, guess what? As a person working with the family, nobody's asking you what your opinion is. Nobody's asking for advocacy at that kind of level. So it's important for you to recognize that the state is basically going to move this family through their hoops to basically figure out where things go next. And as a potential provider, you're not being asked whether you think mom, dad, or whatever may or may not have abused, neglected, or whatever else might happen. And it's very easy to get tripped up in that. And it's important that you kind of back up and go, that's not what I'm being asked to do. The system, and I don't want to get into the sort of, they'll move through what's called shelter, they'll move through a dependency petitioning, they'll move through arraignments, and I don't want to get into all the legal steps that are doing it. But essentially, the state's going to move through its own process. And as it does that, it's important for you to switch gears and say, what is it I need to be focusing on? Were I invited in to work with children and families? So let's move then to kind of say, the state's done what the state has done. The next issue is, were I to be invited in to work with the children and families, what is it I need to begin thinking about as a marriage and family therapist? And I think, from an overview point of view, one of the first things to kind of consider is how do these children present? And keep in mind, what I said earlier when we were talking about that. That is, how does a 7-year-old present? How does a 9-year-old present? How does a 13-year-old present? When you're working with them, at least, based on my experience in Collier County, one of the themes is the kid is working really, really hard to be the perfect child. So when they present, eating their peas and carrots, doing their homework, making their bed is a big piece of what it is they want to do. And when you back up a little bit, you go, well, what's that all about? And it is, I must have done something wrong. And if it's about eating, my fruits and vegetables, let me correct that. Or if it's about not doing my homework, let me fix that. One of the other themes, sort of similar to that is these kids are people pleasers. They can be very affectionate, very needy. And if you're doing play therapy with them, they're very compliant. And you just kind of go, wow, I'll invite this kid into my house. I'd like to adopt this child. And you sort of have to think about, for those of you who have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, you go, no, that's not what, how real children present. And so you need to kind of go, well, wonder what's going on with that. The other, and this is probably more the 13, 14, 15-year-old, is trust. And whether, as you're working with them, the whole idea of, can you be trusted? And the idea is this state basically took the parents away, and are you part of that removal? When you think about that, that means a whole lot of safety issues exist with these children. And they're paying attention to things like, do you start on time? Do you stop on time? Do you allow the cell phone to be intruding or not? Do you have a camera in your office or not? I mean, they're paying attention. Is there somebody outside your door? They're really, really hyper vigilant with respect to and if you say to them, I'm going to bring you a coloring book next week, you better be bringing them a coloring book, because, for those children, well, coloring book's a bad example because it's a younger child, but you sort of get, an idea of what it is that I'm talking about. Other themes that kind of run through, with these children are abandonment. This is, for those of you who have been through a breakup with a significant other, the whole idea of divorce and some of the feelings of what it means to move through divorce is similar to what it is these children are experiencing. Mom and dad aren't there. And whether mom and dad were good, bad, or indifferent, they're not there. And the child is kind of sitting around going, well, what is this? How did this happen? And what was my part in having that happen? And what can I do about that? And how do I think about myself in my, and you can think about depression and, anger and all those other kind of things that are there. Another theme that you'll see a lot, particularly with middle schoolers, is the sort of bad kid identity. And when we're talking about that, it is the idea that I must have been a bad kid because I'm the one yanked out of the house. And I am now sitting with foster parents, or I'm now sitting in a residential treatment facility or whatever it is. And I must have, acted out or done something really stupid, for this to happen. And I deserve it, that somehow or other, I'm the cause of, if I had just been more compliant, if I had just been a better kid, and I'll just show you, how bad I can be. And you'll see, particularly those of you who work with young children in play therapy, and then even a little older, what this anger ends up, kind of looking like. The final theme, I talk about is this situation is out of control. And frankly, it's out of control for every actor in this scenario. It's, despite the fact that the court may feel like it's in control, oftentimes the court itself doesn't feel like it's particularly in control. Department of Children and Families, with its high turnover of caseworkers and et cetera, sometimes, feels as out of control as the kid does. For you as a provider, you'll find yourself going, I thought this child was going to show up in my office and the child's not there. You're feeling like, what of this work that you're trying to do, is in control. And so those are some, broad-based themes that I think we need to be mindful of and thinking about as we're working with children. Let me stop for just a second, check in with Annalyn, and see if any of these themes, based on your experiences or what you've heard about these children, anything you've heard about DCF, anything you've heard about the courts, anything you've heard about children and families that's so far registered with you. Annalyn?
Yeah, so I really like the way you've kind of sorted this by age. Certainly, I was a foster care worker, but I always got the kids that were having a lot of problems. So the kids that had to be in therapeutic foster homes or had to be in residential treatment. So
Yep.
I tended not to get the need to please kids.
Yep.
I tended to get the bad kid, out of control type kid. Yeah, so that I would welcome having those perfect kids, but as you said, that's disturbing in its own way to have them be too compliant. But yeah, certainly depending, it could be as young as 9 that would begin to have trust issues, depending on what's happened. And one of the issues as the therapist is that they've often gone through so many different adults at this point, different workers, different investigators, all of that you're just one more gonna be leaving soon adult, as far as they're concerned. And that really does make the trust for therapy really challenging.
Well, and I think even, that whole sort of chameleon, you were talking about rotating through a bunch of adults. So the whole idea of who am I, really becomes a big question, because if you want me, to be the jock, I'll be the jock. If you want me to be the intellect, I'll be the intellect. If you want me to be the musician, just tell me what you want, and I'll do whatever it takes. And it has to do with that, rotating door that they sometimes feel like. And I think also you began to talk a little bit about dependency and this attachment thing. Sometimes you'll just see these kids grab onto you emotionally, and when you're working with them, it's like, we'll sit there and go, okay, I'm ready. My 50 minutes is up. I'm ready to get out the door. They're not. And it has to do with those attachment issues that are just absolutely, somebody's wreaked havoc with those kind of things. Anybody have any other comments, questions you'd like to make at this point?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, all right, let's move on to the issue of assessment. And when I think about assessment, again, I think about it in system kind of ways. And I don't want to go into detail on any of these. I just sort of want to highlight, if you've run across them in your courses, or if you haven't, need to begin kind of thinking about these. In the state of Florida, they're big on the family functioning assessment, which sort of comes through in an interview. It's very comprehensive. Everything but the kitchen sink is kind of sitting in there. And it gives a big broad brush overview of what we're looking at. It looks at nutrition things, it looks at medical issues, it looks at academic issues, it looks at, every sort of aspect of what's going on in that family, and begins to shape what the state begins to define as a treatment plan. From this family functioning assessment, you'll see them, sort of move to things like we need parenting training, or we need domestic violence training, or we need drug abuse or substance use work, or whatever it is. Typically, it'll come out of this family functioning assessment, and it'll be a sort of broad look at, with this family, here's where we need to go. The other sort of assessment tool that I think makes a whole lot of sense, and a lot of you probably have looked at it, it's the ACEs, it's the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. And this is the one that basically sort of ties trauma to life expectancy, and draws some conclusion about number of traumatic events in your life, and what's the potential of how long you're going to be on the planet. And I think that's sort of helpful to get a picture of, for the children that you're working with, what's the score? What are we looking at here in terms of, we're looking at sex, or we're looking at drug, or are we looking at physical abuse, psychological abuse? What is it, we're kind of experiencing? And the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire gives you that. The next three basically say, as a marriage and family therapist, have you taken a look at the couple, and have you sort of done any, look at what this relationship is? Dyadic adjustment scale's been around for ages, but it does kind of tell you whether or not the way in which they ended up with, this abuse and neglect, did it come out of a relationship? And if so, what's going on with that relationship? Related to that is intimate justice. Intimate justice, says to you, is there domestic violence? What's the level of domestic violence? Gives you, a way of kind of thinking about that. And then the other one that I pose here is the drug one, because a lot of these cases indicate, some level of drug involvement. Now, when we're looking at this, keep in mind that DCF, based on the family functioning assessment, will begin in its mind to come up with how it views the treatment plan. Whether DCF says we're going to involve the family in some kind of substance abuse, whether we're going to involve them in some kind of domestic violence experience of some sort, whether we're going to put them in couples therapy. That's a real stretch for DCF, but they very well could do that. And all of this is going to probably happen prior to your getting involved. However, if it doesn't happen, you need to begin thinking about that yourself. Also, you need to begin thinking about, from a DSM-5 point of view, what do you see in terms of parent-child? What do you see, when you're looking at the individual child? What do you see in terms of things like anxiety? What's there from a point of view of depression? Anna Lynn mentioned the acting out child in a residential treatment. You'd want to look at something like the overt aggression scale. And then the one that is a little tricky is the psychopathology checklist, because basically that's looking at what comes closer to psychiatric issues. And if you think about the recent episodes of shootings, the sort of political zeitgeist is, it's a bunch of crazies. And as a marriage and family therapist, this checklist puts you in a position where you're able to comment on that. You're able to have some understanding of that, as opposed to something like aggression, depression, or anxiety. So those become some tools that allow you then, to be in a position in which you can kind of say, where do I want to go? As Annalyn, mentioned with young people that are in residential treatment, you're going to be asked to take a look at misbehavior. And as a therapist, the judge basically is going to put you in a position of saying, do something about the acting out. And you're being hired, or you're being pulled into the system to do something about this behavior. You're possibly being asked on the family side to say, can we pull this, unite this family, because it seems to be out of balance. It seems to be lacking harmony. And a big piece to this issue is empowering the parents. And so somebody's going to be, pressuring you to basically go, the parents haven't been in charge. They've been out to lunch. They've been focused on their work. They've been focused on fighting with each other, whatever they've been doing. And your job as a therapist is to get them to behave as parents. That's the idea of parenting education. So broadly speaking, if those are your goals, what sort of treatment approaches make sense? And as Annalyn mentioned earlier, I see this, as kind of fitting some categories here that I think are, fairly useful for us to think about. For example, if you're working with the parents, I think that's a whole lot of parent education. And for those of you who are in this position of, trying to figure out your own background, your own training, if you have not, acquired a certification in parent choice or parenting inside out or incredible years, I'd say to you, pick up one of these evidence-based training education programs, get certified to offer it, and you will be very, very valuable to the Department of Children and Family for sure. And that's probably going to be your entry into working with those families. Certainly, once you're in, you can begin to do couples work and some other kinds of stuff. But I think the initial place where DCF is going to want you to work is going to be in parenting education. For those of you who end up working with the little ones, play therapy. And again, when you're thinking about your own background, in addition to picking up a parenting education certification, think about some sort of advanced training in play therapy. And there are half a dozen evidence-based play therapy training programs out there. Adlerian is a big one in Georgia, TheraPlay, and there are half a dozen of these. I don't want to, specify which one I think makes the most sense, but I just say to you, if you're working with preschoolers, it's basically going to be play therapy that's going to make the most sense for them. If we're working with elementary, and Annalyn teed this up earlier, it's basically the judge, the court system is going to say, fix the behavioral issues. And if you can't fix the behavioral issues, you're really not doing what it is the court, expects you to do. And that is, can you figure out whatever the behavior is? Can you figure out how to get this kid to show up at school? Can you get this kid doing homework or behaving in school? Can you get this kid to stop biting, kicking, fighting, whatever it is that the school system has deemed as out of control? Your job as a therapist is to fix that. And if you're going to be of value to them, it's going to be because you did something reduced kicking, screaming, biting, fighting, and all that sort of acting out sort of stuff, that the school system has, said it's a problem for them, and that Department of Children and Family has said, this is what we need you to do. This is your work. We get that you want to take a look at parenting. We get that you want to take a look at the family. But for us as a government, entity, our expectation is you're going to fix these behavioral issues. For teens and tweens, I think you can move past behavioral and begin to take a look at some of the thinking that's going on here. The whole sort of reframing of what's going on, what's happened with this family. For those of you who have any training in Gestalt, I think that's a nice experiential, particularly with kids that are a little antsy and little move around or whatever it is. Some of the Gestalt experiential work works very well. And one of Anne and Lynn's favorite is the idea of narrative. And any of you who work with teens and tweens, their journaling is, this is a time when, I don't know, this may be a bias of mine, but I have a granddaughter who just journals like crazy. And I have a grandson of an equal age, and he's the video game thing. So I'm not sure, how much writing that kid would probably do, but certainly narrative and, getting down on paper this story of what has happened, what's it like to be in the situation in which you're no longer, part of an intact family. You've been split apart. You have no idea how much longer this is going to take. And you also, as we're looking at this, the preschooler, elementary, teens and tweens, the first time you might be asked by the court, what do you want to have happen here, will be teens. It's very, very rare that a judge is going to ask an elementary schooler. Well, there's some judges that will do that, but for the most part, when I said earlier, an out of control situation, nobody's going to ask you. And in fact, I'm working with a 14-year-old now who goes, oh, well, that's my mom's job or that's my dad's job. And I'm going, well, if the judge says to you, what do you want to have happen? Can you imagine what words would come out of your mouth? And we're not getting too far on that conversation. It's a little frightening for him, to think about the possibility that a judge, and I'm quite serious about it because I work with the judges, would want to know, what do you think ought to happen here? And what's your position on, what's next with respect to your family? Now, for the aging out, child, we had a session earlier. Sorry, I don't recall who the presenter was, but all of this sort of career counseling stuff, I think, makes extremely good sense, for the kid who is aging out, to begin kind of thinking about, and keep in mind, we've created a super dependency system in which the state has been in control for whatever the period of time is. And all at once, well, not all at once, but at this point, somebody is saying, you're going to move into an apartment and you're going to get a car and you're going to get a job. And we'll do a little transitional stuff. But for the most part, you very well might want to think about what is life like when the state is no longer in your life? What does that mean when, from whatever period of time, the state has basically, taken over and run things with you? So I think when you look at your training, I just threw out, like a starter kit of, how you might think about treatment. There are tons of models and approaches, and they all make sense. I do think the idea of thinking through developmentally what's a good fit or a good match. But I also, can imagine within your training programs, tons of models and approaches, that would be equally make good sense. I just happen to pull those because of my work and my experience. Let me do one more session, and then I want to talk about expanding your practice here.
So Richard, before you go forward, let me just clarify something. So you're
Sure.
thinking of these children at these various ages and the treatment modalities that you would use. You're thinking of this in terms of individual children. You're working with the child alone for the most part. Is that what we're talking about?
You may or may not have access to parents. You may or may not have access to, if we're looking at a residential treatment center, you may or may not have access to the staff of the residential treatment center. You may or may not have access to staffing sessions at the Department of Children and Family. If you do, that's terrific. That's wonderful. You would love to have a place at the table, but you may not. It may simply be they farm out the kid to you and say, fix this kid.
So I'm looking here in your benefits of treatment.
Yeah.
So you're talking about increased harmony in the family. I got the impression that most of what you were thinking about here are children who are in foster placement. They're out of home. So they're not with parents and they're not with relatives. They're in a foster home or a group home or that kind of a situation. And so when you're talking about increased harmony in the family, you're talking about in the foster situation rather than where the parents are beginning to get custody back, and now we're working on reunification. Or are you thinking both of those things?
Both of those things.
Both of those.
It's tricky because the first level, sort of getting your foot in the door. Once you get your foot in the door, if you can move in those other kind of directions, if you can begin to say, well, I've worked with the kid, I'd really like to work with the parents with DCF, okay. And so if you can move in those kind of directions, that's exactly the direction you want to do. And that is a systemic work.
Yeah, because based on being a foster care worker, the state is mandated to have a permanency placement in 12 months. And so
right.
often what that means is relative placement. So a child that's no longer with parents, but now with grandparents or aunt or some family. And
right.
so that's when we might start seeing this acting out. This might be the context in which we're talking about empowering parents and the family. We're speaking about trying to increase harmony is possibly that relative placement. Or if we're looking at reunification, the kids coming back after parents have not been in their life for some period of time, often a very long period of time, and parents have lost credibility. And so then there's a lot of work with the parents in that environment. But when you're speaking of age out, these are the children that are not with any kind of relative.
Right.
This is the foster group home residential treatment, and in the state of Florida, age out is at 18.
I couldn't remember when it was.
Yeah, it's at 18. We're one of the youngest. I have a dissertation student who's looking into this, and she says that there are some states that allow them to stay to 21 and some as late as 26 in the system. And so you can imagine what a difference the transition is for those young people as compared to in Florida, where at 18, you're out.
Right. Well, and DCF as a goal is really going for reunification.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they're going to do everything they possibly can do, even to the point of erring on the side of putting a kid back into a dangerous situation. And sometimes these things bounce back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
They'll put the kid back, and 6 months later, the kid's back, being removed again because the family couldn't sustain it. But every effort is made by DCF basically to do reunification. And if you, as a marriage and family therapist working with these families, can get your hands on the biological parents in any way, shape, or form, and begin doing, the work with them, it's in everybody's interest to get that to happen.
Here in Broward County, it's not unusual for agencies to either work with the children or with the parents who have lost custody. And so it is the nature of most community mental health centers to be more individual in their mindedness. They're not systemic. And so you're either working with the child and struggling to get the foster parent engaged, or you're working with the parents who are now furious with the system and completely disavowing that they did any of the bad things that they've been accused of, and they just want their children back. And it's, so this is where, as clinicians, not only do we want to look at all these different treatments, but we also want to look systemically at maybe engaging the other therapist. The therapist is working with the kid, or the therapist that's working with the parent, in order to be more systemic in looking at that, at looking how that system is operating. So just so that people know, that at least that's what happens here in Broward County. I don't know what happens in other counties, but I suspect it's somewhat similar.
Well, and if you can get a place at the table, a staffing with DCF or anything that basically has
even the court, if you can get into the court,
absolutely, you can begin to raise those kind of questions. What's happening with the parents, what's happening with the mother, what's happening with the father, what's happening with the grandparents, et cetera, who's increasing the symptoms, who's, all of that kind of stuff. And that is a major contribution you can make at the table, because, when you think of those other disciplines, the social work person probably is going to be focusing on something like dental care, or managing nuts and boltsy kinds of things, and that's their training, that's their background. We are uniquely in this position, to look at the issues that I presented on this slide. This whole business of harmony and what's it going to take, empowerment, and what's that going to take to get that to happen, and recognizing that for this period of time we're looking, basically that's been disrupted by DCF, and that if the goal is a higher level of functioning at school, home, work, community, it's going to take some work to get that higher level to happen. Let me move to, I noticed that some of you are starting programs or you're in programs, and just want to say to you, if you have any thoughts in the back of your mind about this being a population that you might want to work with, let me throw out for you, one possibility. It's highly unlikely, that somebody's going to throw these cases to you just because you end up in an agency or you end up in a private practice. It's going to come, by virtue of a network. And one of the ways I'd like you to begin thinking about it, and this is a little long-term, and I recognize you're jumping through enough hoops in your universities already, but I just want to add another possibility, and that is if you like, you think you want to work in this population, consider becoming a guardian ad litem. This, you probably, when you're thinking about this, it's about a 3-year commitment. I think you probably want to make. What they're going to do is they're going to do a background check to make sure you're, a person that's not going to harm children. They're going to ask for some letters of reference, kind of thing, to, once again, are you a good citizen, kind of thing. They're going to pull you through a face-to-face interview. They're going to provide training. They've moved it from face-to-face to online, but basically I think it's a 1 or 2 day training experience. They're going to do some field training. They're going to monitor you with respect to that field training. And if you have any interest whatsoever, I would invite you to basically just sort of do the guardianadlitem.org and take a look at that and think a little bit about that. This is a sideways way of marketing. This is not about LinkedIn or Facebook or any sort of social media. This is on the ground, face-to-face way in which you're going to build your reputation, and you're going to do that by virtue of being, a systemic thinker and adding systemic thinking to the mix, which will be welcomed. I can tell you that in advance. So I would say to you, for those of you who have any interest in this population, the rewards are great, and the need is certainly there. I can also say to you that within DCF, the turnover is extremely high, and as a result, their need for providers is extremely great. However, they're not going to let you play without some sort of background and experience working with this population. And from my point of view, the Guardian Ad Litem program will give you the background that you kind of need. Commitment, probably is, I don't know, 10 hours a month, something like that. You'll be given probably a case. They'll try to, give you 4 or 5 cases, but, as a student, you just take one case and say, all I've got time for is one case. But I think that will get you, experience, and it may be that you end up, working with somebody who is in a residential treatment. They may be somebody that's in a family member's home. It'll be a variety of circumstances, but I think within a 2 or 3 year period, you're going to be an asset in this system, and you will be invited to the table to work with them. So what I've done is, try to give you an overview of how you might think about working systemically with children in foster care, and wonder, are there any questions on your end?
Richard, could you tell us a little bit about what would make the court assign a guardian ad litem to a particular case? Why would that happen?
It happens. It becomes a monitoring tool for the court. It becomes a way for the court to have another reading on DCF and the work that DCF is doing. And what I didn't do in this particular presentation is talk about what sort of ends up being expert testimony. Essentially, with every one of these cases, and I'm there 3 to 5 times a year, you end up in court, and at a given point, the judge says to you, what do you think ought to happen here? And the judge is leaning quite heavily on you having done your homework with respect to this family. And it's a different kind of homework than DCF. DCF is that broad, did parenting training happen? Did domestic violence happen? Did it, whatever it is. In the case of guardian ad litem, you did hands-on observation of the kid. You know what the school records look like. You know what the medical records look like. You attended staffing. You know whether staffing happened or didn't happen.
And in fact, in some ways, the guardian ad litem has access to more information and more of the larger system representatives than even the family therapist does, because the family therapist is sitting at home on video or in their office, whereas the guardian ad litem is able to go to the school, go get these records, visit the family. It's an out and about kind of thing, and the guardian. Is it your understanding, Richard, that the guardian is sort of the advocate for the child, whereas the parents' attorney are the advocate for the parents, and the child welfare attorneys are the advocate for the department?
Yep.
And so really the kid has no real advocate. And that's why sometimes guardian ad litems are attorneys at litems. They're actual lawyers that they're advocating for the child.
Right. And there is a whole movement afoot, and it goes in cycles, to eliminate the, I guess for want of a better word, that guardian ad litem lay position and only have an attorney position, so that the child has an attorney, the parents have an attorney, and et cetera. And that goes back and forth, and it's different from one state to the next. And in Florida right now, it can be a volunteer lay position that is doing that work. But it does vary from one state to the next. And there is enormous pressure from the legal community to basically get a attorney advocating for the child. But you can see where, as Annalyn, pointed out, in the role that I'm in, I have access to every piece of what's going on in this child's life.
As a guardian, but not necessarily as the therapist.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. But it puts you, for those of you who are a student, it puts you in this big picture position, so that when you become therapist, you're able to see what all the other parts are and what the role of each of those other players are in the system. And I think that's a really helpful place for you to be prior to being the therapist in that system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. I think doing guardian ad litem, or you could go at it the way I did, which was actually to work for foster care, really gives you the bird's eye view of all the workings of these various systems, the school system, the court system, the child welfare system, medical is often engaged, all of the residential treatment, foster care homes, all of that, getting access to that broader system. I couldn't think of a more ideal person to do that than a systemically trained family therapist, even better than the attorneys. But so that you have access to all that information, and then as you then take on in the role of the therapist, all of that is there, and the guardian ad litem then becomes your compatriot in, your collaborator in helping this child and this family.
Right. For those of you who would like the slides, if you will contact Danielle.
Yep.
She has a much prettier version of the slides than the ones I presented for you. But if you'll contact her, she'll be happy to provide those for you.
And there's Danielle's information. Thank you. So Sally B, any questions that you have about this? Anything that sticks out for you as having been particularly interesting?
earlier about the hypervigilance.
Mm,
I just visited my friend for 2 hours and I hadn't met her foster kids before. She's had them more than a year at this point. And one was like a 5 or 6 year old girl, and she was getting along very well with my husband for more than an hour. And then when he left to go outside to smoke a cigarette, she immediately asked, "Where's he going? You know, where'd he go?" And then it was to smoke a cigarette. And I guess she had bad experiences with that. And so, like, I didn't know any of this, background information. So then everybody was quick to tell her, just because he's smoking a cigarette doesn't mean he's a bad person. you know and it was like,
wow.
your mind doesn't go to these places. Or I have a baby, and she was very interested in the baby, but apparently I didn't know what her distress signals looked like. And so my friend noticed she seems to be in some type of distress. I don't want her picking up and walking around with the baby. She can play with the baby on the floor, but she needs to not be more physical. So I felt way out of my league. I've been a school teacher and I've worked in public libraries with disadvantaged children in both of those. And so, just coming in fresh, just seeing things on the surface, you just can't tell until you've been around them longer. And I've known people who have volunteered for guardian ad litem, and I do feel like I probably do have the time and I'm able to stomach some of the things that probably
Well,
happen.
I mean, you don't have to, you can ask them to not give you a case where the child's been trafficked. I mean,
Yeah.
you could ask for something that's a little simpler, to start out with. Sure, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, thank you for that observation that, that these foster kids will often display behaviors that are quite unusual, compared to a child who has not had the experience of being removed from the home. Yeah, it's quite, it really does affect their development in rather dramatic ways. Yeah.
Right.
Let me ask Tori, anything that stood out for you that you'd like to comment on?
The guardianship, I didn't know that was a thing, and I feel like I'm very interested in that. That seems like something I could definitely do in the future. Like that's something I would love to do.
Yeah, it would be excellent to go along with your MFT training. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
So check that out in your county. Yeah,
Yeah,
excellent.
well, that'll be on my homework for this weekend to look into.
All right, very good, very good. And Luzmary, what stood out for you?
I think the whole scenario just was very interesting, and I was actually taking notes while the presentation was happening. It's very important information. I was not aware of it, but thank
Excellent.
you. Thank you
So
for
just
this.
increased awareness of this whole system that's happening in our communities that you weren't aware of. So
That is
excellent.
correct.
Yeah. Danielle, how about you? Anything that stood out for you you'd like to comment on?
Well, I mean, I cheated because I got to see the deck ahead of time. So I already knew what was coming up. I thought it was super interesting information, but the background that he gave about some of the cases that he's worked with and stuff was really interesting. I'm with everybody that commented on, I don't know how much they would be able to handle, because kids in danger are nobody wants to deal with that, but I guess we're training for that. So yeah, it was really interesting. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly.
I would have to say the thing that blew me out was that 86% of the children in foster care are sex trafficking victims. That is quite shocking. When I was a foster care worker, we never even heard of this. This was not ever happening. And so to have it be the vast majority of cases, certainly drug issues and physical abuse, to a much lesser extent, neglect, that's more what I was familiar with. But sex trafficking, wow, that's really a big difference since the when was that, the 1980s? 1990s when I was doing the foster care work. So this is quite a dramatic difference. So
Well, and
thank you
I
for
think-
that, Richard.
Yeah, and that one is particularly difficult when it shows up in the school system, because the way those children present, they'll put their hands on body parts that don't need to have their hands on the body parts, or they'll put their hands on another kid's body parts or whatever it is. that's
Right,
there.
right.
And it-
So and you're right, the school gets very twitchy about
oh, they
seeing
do.
kids act like
Yeah,
this, and
absolutely.
they don't have a good way of finding out that's what's that's what's going on, and they
Mhm.
have even less ability to know how to handle it. So
Exactly.
so it's maybe a future training on how to work with these kids who are victims of sex trafficking
Yeah.
would be a really good thing to do, because the foster families struggle with this, the school system struggles with this, and yet the kid, the child is just doing what they've been exposed to, and they're not doing it in any sort of malicious fashion. And but the adults can't get that. So I really appreciate your call out on that. All right, well, everyone, thank you so much for your time this evening. I hope all of you watching and listening will check out the Florida Interest Network Facebook page for all of our future offerings into 2023. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Glad you
Thank
enjoyed it.
you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay. You just
Bye, guys.
bye-bye.